Hi everyone, my name is Associate Professor Caroline Ellison. I'm the Crossing the Horizon Professor of Ageing and Disability in Justice and Society here at UniSA. I'm also the Program Director for the Bachelor of Social Science, Ageing and Disability. So today we've been talking to Helen Neale. Helen's the project lead for a DSS ILC capacity building grant that's actually about economic and social participation.
That's correct.
And looking at the micro enterprise project. If you've watched the earlier couple of videos, we've talked about what is a micro enterprise, then we've talked a bit about the framework that Community Living Project use. Now we're going to talk about the impact. What has your observation been, Helen, as someone involved with Community Living Project on the impact, particularly around the development of socially valued roles?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think when I start an information session, one thing I always like to do is talk about the value of work, because it's very easy, and certainly as you get older and you've worked a long time, it's easy to be negative about work and do the on Sunday night, oh, I've got work tomorrow and oh gosh, this is happening. But when we really look at what work brings to us, the value, it's quite enormous. So, often I'll ask people, what are those benefits? And people will say things like the ability to contribute, lifelong learning, relationships are made at work, there's income, of course, but there's routine and purpose, and I can go on. But what we've found is that those benefits are often denied to people with disability because their life is often full of time-filling activities. So certainly the benefits are enormous when people can start to have their own micro-enterprise and start to really believe and feel those benefits themselves is quite enormous. It's quite life-changing for a lot of people.
And also I think too, it's about those valued social roles, about people in society viewing people who may seem different as competent.
Absolutely.
And I think for a lot of us, I think particularly of my generation, less so I think for a lot of my students who are younger that perhaps had a more diverse classroom experience. But for me, it wasn't like that. Yeah. I didn't think I'd met a person with a disability till I was in my late 20s. And I went to work as a support worker back in the day. Yeah. And I think that I very quickly learnt that the roles that people with a disability had that I was supporting were very limited. They were a service recipient. Yeah. They might have been a housemate, they might have shared their accommodation. Maybe they went and did the grocery shopping with us, but they weren't really engaged with the various roles. They were often not engaged in the role as sister or brother or friend or neighbour, let alone the role of colleague, work colleague. And they also didn't often have a lot of roles as consumers of things. Maybe their groceries, maybe the pharmacy, but not much beyond that. And I think that one of the things I've noticed with micro enterprise is that being seen by others as being competent, and that thing that Jane Barrett says about if they can do that, what else can they do?
Absolutely.
And that opportunity to be seen by society, not as somebody who it takes someone special to be able to support them, but somebody that is seen as ordinary. So how do you think micro enterprise helps contribute to that concept of an ordinary life?
Well, I think one of the most relatable roles is of business owner, and it's a highly valued role too. So I've seen many times people, enterprise owners, being asked the question, what do you do? And when they can turn around and say, oh, I have my own lawn business, or I have my own dried fruit business, immediately people change, their body language change. They start to think, oh, hang on a sec, that's amazing. And for anyone to have a small business is a big achievement. So they start to see this person as capable. And I think once people are seen as capable through these valued roles, then more good things come. And again, I've witnessed it many times. So the ability to build those relationships, genuine relationships with people in their community. So if someone is selling their product, so let's use the example when you talked about in the previous video about Jocelyn, she goes to regular customers. So she might have maybe a dozen people that on a regular basis she would take her product along. And over time, she's building relationships. Maybe Jocelyn signs, maybe the customer is starting to learn some basic signing to communicate. So she is selling her product, but to get that, she's also buying fruit and boxes and labels. So she is a consumer. She's genuinely contributing economically.
And it's not just groceries and medication.
No, absolutely
She's purchasing labelling, printing. She's engaging with a whole lot of different people to keep her business running, not just the typical,
And then the money that she earns from that, she will then go on a Friday and go to a cafe of her choice and have lunch. So again, she's spending her money in her local community. So it's more than just being seen, it's actually being deeply connected to community, and I think that's a really important thing.
It is important. I know there was a young woman in the beginning of MEP who used to go to Bunnings regularly and buy seedlings, so that she used to grow herbs and flowers in her garden, and then she would deliver them to local cafes for centerpieces or for cooking. And, she was well known in her local gardening. And she could be seen wandering around Bunnings, picking things and putting them in, and having a Bunnings worker following behind her with pulling the trolley. And she was well known for doing that. Interestingly, the personal assistant became, slightly redundant.
That's the role of a good support worker, isn't it?
A good one is that being in the background and having this young woman who was also non-verbal and had her own sign language in buying, and you could hear, I happened to be in the same Bunnings one day, and you could hear the Bunnings worker asking, do you want coriander today?
Right.
Or do you want bok choy today? Or these new flowers are out for the new season. Would you like some seedlings? So I think that's...
Yeah, and that might never have happened. That person would never have had that communication and that conversation together because their disability might have been a barrier otherwise. But it's a common sort of connector, I suppose. And certainly that's the purpose of microenterprise, starting with that genuine interest. I know there's a man who lives out north who has a gem and mineral business, and he's been a gem collector since he was a little boy and is still very passionate about his gems and minerals. But apart from the beautiful jewellery that he makes and the faceting that he's now doing, he also is a really regular contributor to his gem club, his local gem club, and he travels nationally every year to the Gemboree to meet with other people who are interested. So it builds connections when you have that common interest.
And he's really valued for that. That's Absolutely. A very valued role. It builds capacity. So he's now seen as someone who's competent, who's contributing, and that once again, and his jewellery is actually pretty fantastic.
Yeah, it is.
And it's an example of a sort of lifelong interest that he's developed this skill and capacity, and the microenterprise is actually allowing and supporting him to share that throughout the community nationally, which is really very, very exciting.
He actually won a prize last year. I think he got in one of those areas. So again, it's a quality product and service. Sometimes people want to keep their interests as interests and not take it on into a work capacity, but often there is a common sort of love of something in a person that can be explored, and to see whether that could be used in a work way. So, and in all these other ways of valued roles. So with SRV, we certainly talk about relationships, about competencies, about individuality. I think is really, really important. One person at a time. That's what a microenterprise is about.
And I think it's the imagery. If you look at the Community Living Project website and you have a look at the videos that are there, the imagery, which is a very important part of SRV, around who is the person in the image with, what are they doing in the image, what's the aesthetic of the image. If you take what can be a lot of images of people living with disability, they're grouped with other people with a disability. They're often in an environment that isn't the typical community environment. And even if they are, they're in a group, they're away from other people. If you look at imagery around microenterprise, be it CLP or someone else, you'll see images of people that are dressed for the purpose.
Absolutely.
So in the case of the young man in the lawn mowing, he has his own sort of shirt with a logo on it, like I have the UniSA one, which is typical. I work at UniSA, you know, so I'm identified as someone from UniSA, and he should be identified as being from his business. But also where he, you know, if you were to take images of this young man, they would be in people's yards mowing lawns. They're not going to be in a segregated setting somewhere. They're out in the community. And if you're going to take images of him, they're likely to be of him actually doing the activity or with other people, with customers and ordinary people in the community. So I think in terms of valued roles, then when that imagery is out there, when in the community people see that imagery, it actually creates a sense of, well, maybe my thinking about people with a disability and the limiting that my thinking does, I need to shift that thinking.
Well, that's certainly been a huge part of my project, is to increase people's to really broaden their mindset, I suppose, and to assume capacity and increase our expectations. So we've produced 11 videos through the project that are on our website, and there are a lot of actual examples of individual enterprise owners sharing their own stories, which has been wonderful, because that's the powerful stuff. We can talk like this, but actually seeing someone in action with their micro-enterprise is fantastic.
It's really important.
Yeah, it's really, and as we assist the person to really consider the imagery very much so, because we don't want childlike. Unfortunately, sometimes, and often than not, people are seen as forever child with a disability. This is about, you know, doing the job or the role in that typical setting, wearing the gear, with other people doing those things. So it's so important. It really sends such a powerful message.
It does. And so I would suggest to anyone that if you are thinking, what is social role valorisation, it's worth Googling it. It was a concept that has a history. There's Wolf Wolfensberger. There was a Scandinavian man before that talked about ordinary life and the typical rhythms of a day. Jane Sherwin has there's a really seminal article by Joe Osborne. So it's quite accessible. There's also a really fantastic resource called The Key, Valued Social Roles, The Keys to an Ordinary Life, I think it's called. It's available on the Family... resourcing inclusive families. Yeah, that's it.
It's sitting on my desk at the moment.
Yeah,
I've got one I like to use and refer to.
Mine too. Yeah. And students will tell you that it's an essential reading for any of my students. So I think that, you know, have a look at some of those. And if you need to, you can reach out to me, Caroline Ellison at UniSA, or Helen Neale at Community Living Project, and we'd be happy to steer you in the direction of those. Definitely. So thanks again, Helen.
Oh, pleasure, Caroline.